and I'm going to kind of go over how to format a DBQ from start to finish. I actually have this sheet available for everyone here, so you can kind of take a look and kind of see how many sentences you would need to do in order to gain possibly the full points based on how you organize your essay. So what I want to do first is kind of go over the intro. Essentially, if you see here, I have 6 to 7 sentences as essentially what the basic intro would look like. Now, what I usually break that down into is 4 to 5 sentences for the context and then 1 to 2 sentences for the thesis. So let's start off with the context, make sure that we're all on the same page. Basically, the way I'm looking at this is the context is all about providing the background to the prompt. Now, I mentioned this in the DBQ breakdown activity, but the key thing you need to do is make sure that you're using key vocabulary in terms for the time period. Now, the reason why I say this is extremely important is because on the AP exam, they do not give you any credit for just being general or just stating the kind of basic overview of a topic without actually saying what the topic or example is. So, for example, if you were to tell me that there was we're going to talk about the anti-immigration movement. Basically, let's just say we're talking about immigration, and you're saying that there was a lot of people that were not happy with immigrants arriving in the United States. If you don't mention the concept or name of the group known as nativism, then they might not even give you the credit because they want to see that you recognize what the term is and what does it mean in context of what's going on, right? For example, if you're writing an essay about the Revolutionary War and you say that there were a plethora of taxes and acts that were taxed without actually mentioning a single one, then essentially they possibly won't give you the points because you're being general. You're just saying, yes, there are taxes that were taxed against the colonists, but you weren't specific on what types of taxes. What were they really focusing on? Why was this important? Things like that. So that's why it's important that you do remember to use vocabulary. If you don't give me terms, then they might not give you the point. And generally, there's a few concepts that must also be important, as in it must be specific, right? It must be around the 50 to 100 years of the event, so that's immediacy. And it must be relevant to make sense. And I kind of gave the example in class. It's almost like if you're talking about the women's rights movement and you're referencing things like the Neolithic Revolution, in the context of the entirety of the world history, sure, Neolithic Revolution would kind of lead to everything else, which then eventually will lead to the women's rights movement. But you have to understand this is about immediacy. What recently happened within that 50-year span that caused this stuff to occur? And that's kind of the key thing you have to make sure. Now, after that's going to be the thesis. Now, granted, you could pick to write the thesis first. It's really up to you. But generally, the biggest thing to remember about thesis is it must be arguable. That if a claim states, to a relative extent in which taxes caused the revolution, right? Something general like that. If you just restate like taxes caused the revolution because, no, that won't count. You can't restate the prompt. You need to make an argument. What's an example of an argument of that prompt? Taxes had created a major cause, were a major cause of the revolution due to, and then you provide evidence. Now, a formula that might help some students in doing this is usually following this one. Now, you don't have to follow this. I told many students in class that if they had an example that they had used from AP World or they felt more comfortable doing, then that's completely fine. You don't have to use this example. I like this example because it does set you up for complexity down the line because you're using a counter argument in your own argument. So essentially what you would do is you would say despite counter argument, then you can state the 2 pieces of evidence or 2 themes that you're going to focus on and then provide your argument. Or you can even switch it where you say despite this counter argument, you state your argument and then you provide the piece of evidence. For example, if I was doing that same prompt about the American Revolution, one possible thing I could say was, so if the prompt was saying, evaluate the relative importance of taxes in causing the American Revolution, even though that most likely would be an LEQ question, but let's just say that was the DBQ question, I would say, despite some historians' perspectives, that taxes had little to no impact on the cause of the revolution due to the feelings of salutary neglect being the major cause. However, taxes had caused major discontent amongst the colonists and inadvertently caused the American Revolution due to their heavily reliance on personal freedoms, as well as fears of an overbearing centralized government, right? Something like that. And I can make that as my thesis statement, because what I did was I gave a counter argument and I gave an example of that counter argument. Then I provided my argument and the two themes I'm going to focus on. Now, with that being said, we need to now take a look at the next section, which is the body paragraphs. Now, body paragraphs can differ. You can either have two, you can have 2, 3, and 4, or you can have 2 body paragraphs, 3 body paragraphs. It's really up to you. Essentially, it depends on how many themes that you have, right? So it really is important to see how you categorize and organize your documents so that you can create a very diverse and I think well organized essay. So essentially, what happens is within these body paragraphs, you must include your documents, right? The minimum to gain the full points is 6 documents. My suggestion is for you to do all 7, because if you mess one up, you still have a chance to gain the full point. You also need to include 3 happy statements, which include historical situation, audience, purpose, and point of view. The minimum to do happy statements is 3. The other option is you do 4. So just in case you mess one up, you still have a chance to get the full point here. You must have a minimum of 1 outside evidence. So basically, it must be something that's not included in the document, and you need to make sure that it is relevant to the situation, and you have to be able to connect it to your thesis. My suggestion is you have 2, just in case you miss 1, you can still get the point. And make sure that when you're using your outside piece of evidence, that you must describe the evidence and also connect it to your argument, okay? And then finally, you'll have a conclusion, which is mainly used for complexity. You're going to summarize your main points, but also making connections to possibly other arguments, comparing things to other points in history, or be really describing the short and long-term effects of the situation. It's really using another historical thinking skill. So how do you go about doing the body paragraph? So there's a few things, okay? The body paragraphs, which is when you're looking at documents, right? Each document that you're going to be using should follow in this type of criteria, okay? 1, you need to make sure you describe the document. So basically the way I talk about this is you need to be able to state, what does the document tell me? What's the main idea? What should I be looking for? And so in 1 to 2 sentences, you essentially should be able to state document 1 claims or states that, and you explain what is the basic concept they're looking for here. Okay, that's kind of the key thing. Secondly, this is where you can incorporate your happy statement, right? Or going right to your argument, right? Or your analysis. So let's just say you're using a happy statement. You want to pick one of the 4 here, right? And then you want to basically use one of these key ones, so HAPP, to then build on the document and connecting it to your analysis. So to kind of give you some concept about this, I also did provide I should just do it this way. There we go. Script. So basically, I also provided another document that essentially gives you the ability of the step-by-step process, right? So for example, describe the argument and claim. Do not quote anything that is on the document. You are just trying to use your own words, paraphrase it, okay? So for example, let's just say you are trying to do document 1, you're trying to describe it. You can start by saying, the author or artist of document 1 argues or claims that, and then you basically identify what is going on. Describe what's going on here and be, obviously just be more straight to the point, but don't just claim the obvious. You basically want to make sure that you just explain it thoroughly. Okay. That's kind of the key thing. Secondly, you want to use your happy statement. So there's a lot of different types of prompts that you could use. Let's just say you're doing purpose. Okay. If you're doing purpose, you would state, once you do your description of the document, you can start your sentence by saying, this highlights blank in document 1 was appealing to, was the purpose of this document was trying to inform or convince or criticize. Because remember, you want to use a specific verb if you're doing purpose, right? Audience is like this one, where they're trying to appeal to a specific audience and likely to try to support something else, right? Now you can even use 2 at the same time. That's more of an advanced learner. But you don't have to. I mean, you can pick one or the other. You can pick both, audience and purpose, kind of together. That is a pretty advanced thing to do, but it's up to you. I think that is a pretty solid way to go about it, though. You do things like point of view. What's the tone of the message? What is the background or frame of reference and why it might impact their writing, right? Things like that. But essentially, you're using the HAP to build what is this document for, and then you're trying to actually expand on like the kind of the context of what they're talking about, and being able to connect it to your answer. So let's just say, and if you remember, if you look back at the document I was sharing with you after your HAP analysis, and that's if you choose to use this HAP analysis for this document, because you don't necessarily have to use it for every document. You need to do it for at least 3, and my suggestion is you do it for 4. Once you get to the third point, which is your argument and how you connect it to your thesis, it must match. How does it match your argument? How does it prove your point, right? And so it's not just describing, right? You're connecting it. How does this work? How does this go with my argument? And if you don't do description and argument, then you won't get the full point for any document. So in order for you to do this, your basic concept of what you're really looking for is, how does your document prove this? How does your evidence support? How does it support X or Y? So essentially what you're doing is you can start your sentence by saying, therefore, document blank supports the argument that, and you state your argument because, right? Because what you're doing is you're not only telling me the document is connecting to your argument, but then you're explaining how does it connect to your argument. Essentially what you're trying to do is just make sure that you're proving your point. So to kind of give you an example of how does someone go about doing this, this is like a document you guys probably won't get until later in the course once we get through this, but I'll show you kind of just a basic thing that I've seen before. So for example, for step 1 is about the description. So if the prompt is stating, evaluate the extent in which the progressive movement fostered political change in the United States from 1890 to 1920. To describe the source, they essentially said Jane Addams claims that many voters had jobs and social services gained through a corrupt official or political machine. She is concerned for the people she helps out at the whole house because the expectation is that the political official or political machine is in return for his services will demand voter loyalty from those he helps come election time. You see, she didn't just say, yes, this is a document that, said these things. She goes into more detail. They state what was the concern? What was the thing going on? What is this really about? What are their main points here? Because once you do that, it sets up for everything else. So one of the happy statements that she had done was basically talking about her background, right? So saying Jane Addams was a progressive social activist who founded the whole house for the poor and less fortunate immigrants. Therefore, her point of view, and this is important, you can literally state what HAP you are using. You don't have to hide it. You can literally state it. Her point of view, she believed that many services provided to the urban poor and immigrant communities by political leaders and the machines represented corruption to be fought against by political reform movements. You see how it connects to the argument, and that's kind of the key thing. So she not only does this writer state the point of view, who she is, but then says her point of view shows or connects to the argument by stating this, right? That's kind of the key thing I want you to be able to do. Not only can you describe the document, but connect it. And then finally, based on the ability for them to connect what the happy statement saying as well, this is what they kind of finalize as how they do an analysis. Therefore, Adams' claim supports the argument that the progressive movement fostered political change in the United States because due to ongoing pressure from social activists, the federal government began to decrease some of the power of local political machines by allowing the people to vote for U.S. senators instead of local political machines selecting them. On the other hand, one could counterclaim, and this is the best part, they are building complexity. So this is the first part. You don't have to even add those last 2 sentences here. Look, this part I highlighted is what you need to have in order to gain that point. But then this example builds on it by talking about a counterclaim. When you make a counterclaim in your document, or in your thesis, you essentially can now continue doing that through pieces of evidence that you add at the end of your document. And now you're building complexity. On the other hand, one counterclaim that the political machines in the cities like Chicago continued even beyond the progressive era to control local politics through voter intimidation or handing out favors to voters in order to gain support. So not only does this give you the full point of the evidence beyond documents and the happy statement, but now it sets you up to do a complexity, right? So now you're building even more in-depth understanding, building in a counterclaim, and that's actually very fantastic. So I really think that's a good example, and this will be available for you to use as well. But essentially, you're really going to follow in that formula when the body paragraphs come around. And for the mini DBQ assessment, we're only focused on the intro and the body paragraphs. Okay, that's kind of the key thing I want you to do. For conclusion, it's all about complexity, right? Can you build counter arguments? Can you build connections? Can you make comparisons and can you analyze short and long term effects? Those are things later on, right? And we're going to do more practice of this, obviously. But the key thing I want you just to understand is how do you write an intro? How do you write a body paragraph? And how do you analyze documents? And this video will hopefully help you along that process. So please let me know if you guys have any questions. This is Ms. Langella. I'm signing off for the night. Peace out, guys.